Hello, everybody, and welcome to Monday morning, where we watch the Sunday morning news shows so that you don't have to. I'm Katie Halper.
I'm Aaron Maté. Hey, everybody. Thanks so much for being here. Great to start the week with you and some of the worst people on corporate TV, the Sunday news shows that we are going to be mocking today. Our website is usefulidiots.podcast.com. Go there to support the show and get bonus content.
Yep, and extended interviews, and it's always fun to do the Thursday Throwdown, where you basically get a midweek version of this because we know that you don't get enough from just Sunday morning news shows, so we provide you with midweek clips, and it couldn't get any better than that.
Yeah. All right. Well, let's hear from Meet the Depressed.
This Sunday, Russian reset. President Trump refuses to blame Russia for the war in Ukraine, seemingly embracing Moscow's views as he negotiates a deal to end the war.
You've been there for 3 years. You should have ended it 3 years. You should have never started it. You could have made a deal.
While Republicans put the blame on Putin.
This man is a cancer and the greatest threat to democracy in my lifetime.
How is President Trump changing America's relationship to allies and adversaries? Plus,
I like the way they call it Russian reset. It's like we got the RPB, Russian playbook. Now we got the Russian reset, RR. And yeah, they're very creative with that.
Deep cuts.
I wanted to find somebody smarter than him.
Okay, now watch this. Oops.
The Russian reset. The Russian reset has a very storied history. The Obama administration tried to launch this big, what they call the Russian reset, after they took office, but it didn't go very well because Hillary Clinton presented Sergei Lavrov with like a literal reset button. But the problem is they spelt reset in Russian wrong, so they couldn't even get the translation right. So the reset that the Obama administration handed the Russians, like written in Russian, didn't mean it meant like something. It was like it actually had something to do with like anyway, the point is it was the wrong Russian word. So the reset got off to a terrible start because they couldn't even spell reset right in Russian.
Yeah. It was well, I'll get back to you with what it really I think it was overload. That's what it was instead of reset. Russian overload. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, now watch Musk's face here while Trump praises him.
Searched all over. I just couldn't do it.
With thousands of federal workers fired.
He's like a little happy child who's getting praised by his dad. All right.
Billions of dollars in funding frozen. How far is President Trump willing to go in allowing Elon Musk to reshape the government?
This is the chainsaw for bureaucracy.
That was an amazing moment, by the way, watching him with the chainsaw. I'm very torn with whether or not to react to Elon Musk stuff because he is trolling everyone, but it's hard not to react to it because it's just so ridiculous to see someone with a live chainsaw talking about slashing things.
Yeah. On top of not trusting him to be in charge of cutting government programs, I also don't trust him to handle a chainsaw. He's kind of an awkward person.
Yes.
I don't think he should be wielding a chainsaw, especially in a crowded place like CPAC, where this was happening. You know,
true.
A lot of conservatives could get hurt.
Right. That would be awful. Yeah. And Milei was there of Argentina, also kind of an awkward guy.
Very awkward guy.
Yeah.
Caught up in a crypto scam right now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you love to see it. It's grotesque, as someone as Irene put in the comments. It truly is grotesque. But luckily people should know it was a fake chainsaw. I believe.
Oh, okay. Well, that's good. I didn't know that. That's good. Okay.
I think so. I'm hoping that they wouldn't have let him use a real chainsaw, but it kind of reminds me of Spinal Tap. Just there's something so performative, like with the props, and I don't know if you guys saw Spinal Tap, but they have a Stonehenge clip sketch, and they have little people because they forget to write the correct dimensions. But yeah, it's very theatrical. So
I didn't know they made I didn't know that they made fake chainsaws, but my hope is if this was indeed a fake chainsaw, that better not have been spent with government money, because that's an item for Doge to cut, is people
Yeah.
spending money on fake chainsaws. That's
Yep.
not a legitimate government expenditure, even
Right.
if Elon can use it for a photo op to talk about how much bureaucracy he's cutting.
Yeah. And I don't honestly know. I've heard both things. So let us know if you think it was a real chainsaw or a fake chainsaw. Either way, it was very good crowd work. Okay. Let's keep going.
Good Sunday morning. As the president marks his first month in office, there is growing fallout over the mass firings across the federal government. On Friday night, President Trump removing a number of senior military officers, including four-star General C.Q. Brown, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. And overnight, federal employees received an email asking them to summarize their work for the past week. Elon Musk adding failure to respond will be taken as a resignation. It comes as his operatives are now working inside at least 8.
If any worker tweeted as much as Elon does, they'd be fired. Like, Elon is on X all day,
True.
Laughing at all the jobs he's cutting and warning about all these new woke programs that he's uncovering, which, by the way, have been massively inflated. The Wall Street Journal had an article saying that, like, while the Trump administration claims to have cut $55 billion in waste, it's actually a fraction of that. And actually, very little of it relatively has to do with so-called woke programs. So they're also really exaggerating all the cuts that they're identifying, while meanwhile putting out a bill, a House budget bill, that will go after Medicaid after Trump promised he wouldn't do that.
Yeah. Well, what's interesting, Aaron, speaking of Elon Musk doing things that are not very productive, apparently Kash Patel told his employees at the FBI, for now, please pause any response, because Elon Musk, while he's tweeting the day away, would like people to be responding to, would like to have people email. So maybe we'll see some what would that be? Trumpet on trumpet violence.
Yeah, Tulsi Gabbard did the same thing. Told people not to engage with Elon Musk's email. So I don't know. Maybe they'll be exempt from having to do this, like their departments, but not everybody. I think for good reason is taking this seriously, because who is Elon to just be asking everyone to tell them like what they're up to?
Yeah.
Especially when he spent so much time screwing up. I mean, he's fired people in really important positions that they've had to rehire, including people who guard the nuclear stockpile. So that would be his list. Like, oh yeah, I fired people who guard the nuclear stockpile. I had to rehire them. Oops. And I spent a lot of time on Twitter.
Right.
And then I went to CPAC and I paraded around with a prop chainsaw.
I mean, I just hope he doesn't show up at Tulsi and Kash Patel's front door with a chainsaw.
Well, stay tuned.
18 departments and agencies. Musk punctuating the moment by brandishing a chainsaw at a conservative conference in Washington.
This is the chainsaw for bureaucracy. Chainsaw.
Oh my God.
But we've escorted the radical left bureaucrats.
I like the way he calls it. He says chainsaw. It's like it's his pet or something. He's like calling it by a name, kind of like I call my dog by their names.
Rats out of the building and lock the doors behind them. We've gotten rid of thousands.
Back in their districts, Republican lawmakers have been forced to
So he's saying that all the workers he's fired are all radical left. Like, how are they going to respond to that? People who actually just were not radical leftists or leftists at all, but just like federal workers doing their jobs, including at the IRS and the park services and working with underprivileged children, all these things. Like, he's going to paint everyone as radical left. Anyway, I think this will come back to haunt them. I don't think the public is as enthusiastic about firing, just average workers as Trump and Elon Musk are.
Right.
defend the cuts to voters at town halls from Georgia to Oregon, Wisconsin, and beyond.
I understand trying to do more with less. That's reasonable. What's not reasonable is taking this chainsaw approach, which they obviously admit when they fired these people and then decided, oh, we fired the wrong people. We got to bring them back in. Why is this being jammed down the pipe so rushed and sloppily?
Even one of President Trump's allies, Fox News host Jesse Waters, urging the president to rethink the firings after learning a friend, a veteran, would be cut at the Pentagon.
We just need to be a little bit less callous with the way, Harold, we talk about doging people. Okay, I want that to sink in.
Now,
that's a funny comment. Less callous, so he's okay with being callous and mocking people who are fired, but just less callous because sometimes those people include his friends. So it's a funny. That's like the best way that a Fox News host or Jesse Waters, to be specific, can show empathy. He's like, let's be callous. Okay, let's be callous. Right. Let's be like, I'm down being callous. Let's mock average workers, but let's be less callous.
Yeah.
And that's like, me being empathetic. Right.
Let's be slightly less sociopathic. Let's tone down the sadism a little bit. And it's so funny. These people are incapable of having empathy. It's only if they know someone it happened to. You know what I mean? Like, it has to be someone that they know. They can't actually care about people as a default. It has to be someone that they know who makes them realize that maybe this isn't a good idea.
President Trump this week also appending decades of U.S. foreign policy towards Russia, suggesting Ukraine is to blame for being invaded by Russia 3 years ago.
Today I heard, oh, well, we weren't invited. Well, you've been there for 3 years. You should have ended it 3 years. You should have never started it. You could have made a deal.
Russian troops.
If you parse what he's saying there, he's not saying that Ukraine started the war. He's saying Ukraine had opportunities to avoid it and then end it. And he's exactly right. I'm not even sure if he fully knows the history, but we've covered extensively. You have a coup in 2014, which the Obama administration backed. Then you have the Minsk Accords, which was the deal brokered by European states, endorsed by the UN Security Council to end the war that began after the 2014 coup, which Zelensky and other Ukrainian leaders ignored. And then you had the Istanbul talks after Russia invaded, which came very close to a deal between Ukraine and Russia, but the US and Boris Johnson stood in the way. So he's exactly right that Ukraine could have stopped this war both before it began, before Russia invaded, when there was just a war going on in the Donbass, and then after Russia invaded. He's right. And of course, because he's admitting the truth, corporate media is having an absolute meltdown. But on that front, for all the harm that Trump is causing in this country, around the world, he's exactly right when it comes to this issue and the fact that it could have been shut down.
Yeah, I know. It's so funny how the resistance is always wrong, always mad at Trump for the wrong things, like this, or like what he did with when he tried to propose to get out of Syria. They were up in arms about that. Not, though, of course, when he bombs countries or wants to bomb countries or advocates bombing countries.
Strange priorities, these people. Very strange priorities.
Currently occupy about 20% of Ukraine's territory in the east and south. President Trump also falsely calling Ukrainian President Zelensky a dictator.
A dictator without elections. Zelensky better move fast or he's not going to have a country left.
This week you called President Zelensky of Ukraine a dictator. Do you think that President Putin of Russia is also a dictator?
I think that President Putin and President Zelensky are going to have to get together because you know what? We want to stop killing millions of people.
Nice pivot. I mean, he didn't answer the question asked, but
no.
Good pivot.
New York Post unleashing on Mr. Trump, showing Russian President Putin on its cover with the headline, "This is a dictator."
This is written by a neocon sadist named Douglas Murray, who spent most of his time since October 7th just manufacturing consent for Gaza's genocide. And it gives you an idea of the kind of people that are behind this proxy war in Ukraine, is people who are just so committed to Western hegemony, whether it's in Ukraine or in Israel-Palestine, that they're willing to say anything. And that's who Douglas Murray is. And that's why again, for all my criticism of Donald Trump, it's refreshing that neocons like Douglas Murray are having a freak out right now that he's making peace, or he's looking like he's making peace with Russia when it comes to Ukraine. The fact that neocons like Douglas Murray are so upset and so triggered should be seen as a positive sign. Whenever they're mad, you can almost bank on it that means something good is happening for the world. And I think that's the case here, because why would we want to keep fueling this horrible war in Ukraine, which, as Trump said, has killed a lot of people?
Right.
For what?
Well, it's also funny because they point to the New York Post as if it's this respectable outlet. I mean, this is an absolute trashy rag. Even the headline, "This is a dictator," and people should know the kinds of trashy headlines that this place puts out. I remember when Yasser Arafat was dying, they had a headline that was, "It ain't over till the Arafat lady sings."
Ooh, that's tough.
I mean, just like so stupid. I mean,
Yeah.
but thanks, Welker, for showing us for keeping your finger on the pulse of the New York Post.
As the reputable newspaper New York Post reported, Putin is a dictator and war is good. Okay, well, listen, let's hear from Steve Witkoff. He's Trump's envoy for the Middle East, but he's dabbling into the Ukraine war as well. He recently went over and met with Vladimir Putin. And even though Trump's appointed this retired General Keith Kellogg to be his envoy for Ukraine, it looks like Witkoff is really the guy he's leaning on. And Witkoff went on CNN with Jake Tapper, and I got to say, he kind of blew Jake Tapper's mind with the heterodox statements that Steve Witkoff made, which are just never, ever said on corporate TV.
Everybody watching can understand the need for diplomacy, and especially President Trump wanting to reset the relationship with Russia. But what do you say to the millions?
I'm curious, people in the chat, let us know if this audio is loud enough. It seems a little quiet to me.
Yeah.
And if it's too quiet, we'll find another one. So let me know.
Or turn your volume up and we'll give you a heads up when we go back down. Yeah.
People around the world who are concerned that the United States right now doesn't seem to understand who actually launched this war against Ukraine and is actually trying to sidle up to the bad guys, Putin and the Russians, while screwing over the good guys.
The bad guys are the good guys, because politics is like a Star Wars movie. And wait a second, we're not on the side of the good guys right now. I was told that Zelensky and neo-Nazi militias in Ukraine are the good guys and Putin's the bad guy. So, I mean, come on, Jake, like, you're a grown man. This isn't a school project. This isn't a comic book. Can we use some more grown-up language here rather than good guys and bad guys? I mean, it's a little silly. It's a little demeaning.
Yeah, and also, is this really like the way that you want to be running diplomacy? Like reducing everything to good guys and bad guys?
Can't speak to the bad guys. Oh my God! Like they're bad guys. I can't speak to them. Oh no, can't speak to the bad guys.
So stupid.
Yeah.
It's also like, I mean, we've been making this point I've been making this point for a while, which is like, if the guy's a bad guy, you want to end the war that he's engaged in, right? And that's why, again, the Hitlerification of Putin, people love that, because the takeaway from that is you can't negotiate. And that's such an irresponsible thing to argue. And our guest last week, who was excellent, we talked about that with her. Okay.
Zelensky and Ukraine. I think that is a fear that a lot of Americans have.
First of all, by a lot of Americans, he means a lot of American corporate news anchors and pro-war pundits, because most Americans actually want an end to the war that they've been funding with well over $100 billion.
Ukrainians.
Yeah, as do Ukrainians too. Yes, exactly. Which is why Zelensky doesn't want to hold elections, is because he wouldn't do so well if they were held today.
Well, look, I've heard that kind of talk. I don't necessarily agree with it. But let me say this. I'll make a few comments. The first is that the war, irrespective of who started it, needs to end. Too many people's lives have been expunged as a result of it, and it just doesn't make sense to the president. He wants to be the peacemaking president, peace through strength, and I don't blame him. I actually concur right down the line with his thought process around this. That's one. Two, that the war did.
By the way, too many lives have been expunged.
I
Like,
know.
I don't know. It's like this is what happens when you put in corporate leaders in top diplomatic posts. Like they're still speaking as if they're like running like a some sort of big deal or some kind of big
Yeah.
company. Like the lives have been expunged. I don't know.
Yeah.
There's not much humanity, and I mean, I understand. I appreciate the sentiment that some people have died.
Right.
I appreciate that, but expunged, I don't know.
Yeah. He's a real estate guy.
Yeah. Yeah.
And deals with the bottom line and finances. And it is nice to hear him talk about this, but it would be nice if to hear him talk about lives and deaths and that's important. But of course, just a good reminder that for some reason when it comes to Palestine, he's not really concerned with expunged lives.
No, they're not. No, they're not. In fact, their plan is to expunge Palestinians from Gaza, aka
Yep.
ethnic cleansing. So
Right.
yes. Yeah. And which we'll hear more about later
Yeah.
in the show.
Didn't need to happen. It was provoked. It doesn't necessarily mean it was provoked by the Russians. There were all kinds of conversations back then about Ukraine joining NATO. The president.
Hold on, wait, let's rewind this a little bit because this is an important point to make. Hold on. Okay.
Conversations back then about Ukraine joining NATO. The
sorry.
president. That the war didn't need to happen. It was provoked.
That's an interesting point that a lot of people who we've had on the show have made that point. And Aaron, I know from the beginning you were saying from the very beginning this was not a justifiable invasion, but it was not unprovoked. And I think that's a fair assessment. I don't know how you can see it any other way.
Exactly. I mean, it's so obvious. Anyone with their eyes open could see it was provoked. What's mind blowing is that a top U.S. official is now saying it on corporate TV, and Jake Tapper, not used to hearing someone say that, is left scrambling. Let's watch the rest of this exchange.
Doesn't necessarily mean it was provoked by the Russians. There were all kinds of conversations back then about Ukraine joining NATO. The president has spoken about this. That didn't need to happen. It basically became a threat to the Russians. And so we have.
So what he's saying there is that pushing NATO membership for Ukraine became a threat to the Russians and provoked the Russians. That is a sea change in U.S. policy for years. I mean, whether it's the Bush administration, which pushed through this NATO invite to Ukraine, or the Obama administration, or the Biden administration, or even the first Trump administration, they've all claimed that, oh, NATO is just a defensive alliance. Russia's nothing to fear. So now a top U.S. official is admitting that, in fact, this was a threat to the Russians, which is true. I mean, if we put a hostile military alliance if there was a hostile military alliance on U.S. borders, like Canada or Mexico joining a China or Russia-led alliance, we'd take that as a threat. And so finally, someone's admitting what is so obvious but has been banned from discussion, which is that, yes, this was a provocation of Russia. And there were many other provocations. There was the 2014 coup, in which the U.S. backed the overthrow of a government that was promising neutrality to not join NATO. And that's why the Obama administration backed their overthrows, because they wanted to bring in someone who wanted to join NATO, because they wanted to provoke Russia. And by the way, there's a whole long documentary history of U.S. officials at the very top, including the Clinton White House, which first proposed to bring Ukraine into NATO, admitting that this was provocative to Russia, but saying we shouldn't say that in public. But that's in my forthcoming book, which will be out when it's out.
In a couple years.
Yeah. Well, no, before then. But the point is, there's so much evidence for it. What's different now is finally someone's breaking the firewall, the sound barrier, and saying it out loud. It's and that's whatever the Trump administration's motives are.
Right.
If they want to make deals with Russia, they want to try to pull Russia away from China, even if it's the most cynical agenda possible, I still welcome it, because it means that they're admitting the truth about this horrible war and hopefully bringing it to an end.
Yeah. Sometimes you got to bring in a real estate man. That's the big takeaway.
Yeah, to expunge the propaganda.
Yep.
That fact, and those are real facts on the ground here. But be that as it may, the Russians have indicated that they are responsive to an end to this. There were very, very, what I'll call cogent and substantive negotiations framed in something that's called the Istanbul Protocol Agreement. We came very, very close to signing something, and I think we'll be using that framework as a guidepost to get a peace deal done between Ukraine and Russia. And I think that will be an amazing day.
That's another very significant comment, because he's also acknowledging something that you can't acknowledge on TV, on corporate TV, and in fact, just across the media spectrum. I mean, our media coverage of the Ukraine war has been so terrible, including progressive media. He's talking about the Istanbul Accords, the peace deal that Ukraine and Russia brokered nearly 3 years ago. Today's actually the anniversary of the invasion.
Oh yeah.
And right after the invasion, a few days afterwards, Ukrainian and Russian officials met, and that culminated in the April 2022 Istanbul talks, where they were so close to reaching a deal. But we know now the Biden administration and Boris Johnson stepped in and blocked it. And what Wickoff is saying there is that they were so close to reaching a deal. And that fact has been totally expunged from corporate media, because that goes against the narrative that Russia is just hell-bent on destroying Ukraine, wiping it off the map, and we can't negotiate it with it. Well, the fact that he's saying we were so close to a deal undermines that narrative. And he's also saying that we're going to base a new agreement that's going to be a guidepost, he says, for new peace talks, which means Zelensky, or whoever is leading the Ukrainian government, if it's not going to be him, will be forced to accept a deal that they could have had 3 years ago, before hundreds of thousands of people were killed, and of course on less favorable terms, because there's no way Russia's going to accept the same deal now for Ukraine, because Zelensky walked away from Istanbul. They're going to Ukraine will be forced to accept, in Russia's eyes, a less generous deal. That's just how it goes. And so it's such a humiliation for Zelensky, and it's also a humiliation for corporate TV news, which is banned discussion. It's Orwellian the way that those talks have been completely whitewashed. At best, they get mentioned only in passing. The New York Times finally put out an article last year about those talks in depth, but even in the process, still whitewashed what happened and totally omitted the fact that the U.S. blocked the progress that was reached in Istanbul. Even as top Ukrainians said that the Russians reached a real compromise and Putin did everything possible to make peace.
Yeah. Really, absolutely unbelievable to watch this stuff. And you know, again, as you pointed out, Aaron, it doesn't mean people can be so stupid in their analysis. Like, they think that if you side with ending a war, you're becoming a Trump fan or you're Trumpian. And no, this is if anything, it's a damning of the Democrats to show you that Trump is the one who gets to claim credit for this, when this is something the Democrats should have been doing. I mean, this is something Biden should have been doing.
Bernie Sanders just released a video saying what a sad day this is, that Trump is talking to Putin.
Sad day.
Yeah.
Watch him release
so
it.
Bernie's sad that Trump is trying to end the war. It's like, and so Bernie's basically, and of course, Bernie's ceding ground to the Republicans, like the J.D. Vances and the Trumps, who are ending a war, but of course have no answers on all the social problems we have. And so Bernie, rather than being the guy that says, hey, anyone who opposes war, I'm with you. And also, look, I actually have a plan to help working people in this country and give everyone health care. He's ceding the ground to people who don't like war on this issue. I mean, yes, he's better, obviously, than them on Palestine. But this is a major issue, and this costs a lot of money. And Bernie's sad, apparently, that Trump is bringing it to an end. It's very strange. But watch what Jake Tapper does here, because Jake Tapper, Wickoff has made these points about the Istanbul talks and about NATO expansion. Does Jake Tapper try to challenge him on those points? No. He tries to go to familiar Russia playbook talking points.
And the fact is, the president understands how to get deals done. Deals only work, Jake, when they're good for all the parties. And that's the pathway that we're on here.
Of course, just a reminder, viewers, Russia seized Ukrainian territory in 2014 with Crimea. They've been going into the Donbass region and seizing land in eastern Ukraine long before they attacked 3 years ago when they did the full front.
Yes, Jake, but you're omitting that Russia took Crimea after the U.S. backed a coup and helped install a government that was now promising to join NATO, and that would place Crimea, which is Russia's most important naval base, under NATO jurisdiction. Right. A majority of Crimeans supported Russia's annexation, and again, Crimea which is majority ethnic Russian, was a part of Russia until it was transferred by Nikita Khrushchev in the 1950s in a weird administrative decisions. Anyway, and then of course, yes, Russia went into the Donbass, but that was after the new coup government, with U.S. encouragement, as I've reported on, launched an assault on the Donbass where people were rebelling against the new coup government, which is, of course, Jake Tapper, Jake Tapper omits.
Assault. You just suggested Russia was provoked. Trump is publicly attacking Zelensky as a dictator. He blamed him for starting the war in the first place, called for new elections in Ukraine, took NATO membership for Ukraine off the table. He said it's unlikely Ukraine will.
By the way, I mean, he makes it sound like NATO membership was on the table before. The only difference is that Trump admitted it wasn't on the table, whereas Biden cynically used it as kind of a carrot, while the entire time knowingly was not going to ever give it to them. That, to me, is pretty cynical. I mean, that is pretty irresponsible. It would be nice if Jake Tapper were upset about that and all the people who died just because they wanted to bleed Russia.
100%. It's the most cynical thing in the world to dangle this hope of NATO membership in front of Ukraine, knowing that actually they were not going to give it, and using that prospect to bait Russia and fuel a war. And that's exactly what Biden did. Only at the end of his term to be like, yeah, you know what? Ukraine's not ready for NATO. I don't support it. And of course, no one was outraged about that, because that dangling was used to fuel the proxy war, which everyone is on board with.
Yeah. I mean, to be fair, Tapper's not the sharpest pencil in the drawer, tool in the drawer, or pencil in the box, whatever. He may not honestly have known that NATO membership wasn't going to be an option. But, you know, I mean, either way, it's embarrassing, because either he's a liar or he's an ignoramus, which is a, kind of one of the requirements for getting on corporate media.
Well, how about both?
Yeah, you're right.
Why not
You
both?
can't have it all. You can't have it all. Yeah.
Be able to get back its territory seized by Russia. Russian state TV suggests that President Trump is getting all of this straight from his conversations with President Putin. Take a listen.
Trump отвечает на вопросы по поводу пресс-конференции.
When Trump is answering questions about the press conference, I think it is not a coincidence that many of the narratives that are being voiced largely materialized after their conversation.
Но фразы, которые он дает,
the phrases he is saying are so deep and so correct. They are in total alignment with the way we see things.
Do you think it's good that the Russians think that the Trump administration is in total alignment with the way that Putin sees things?
Do you think it's good that the Russians are saying things that Trump is also saying? And so what, Jake?
They're the bad guys. They're the bad guys.
Yeah, exactly. It's the juvenile thing. It's like, wait a second, they have cooties. So we can't say what they're saying, or else we're going to have cooties too. It's like, this is the most juvenile way of thinking I've ever seen. Like, because someone who Jake doesn't like is saying something, that means we can't say the same thing. It's so, like, either the policy is correct or it's not.
Right.
Jake Tapper.
Right.
It's not about whether or not a Russian person is saying the same thing. It's about whether the policy is good. And if he thinks that a policy of funneling tens of billions of dollars worth of weaponry paid for by U.S. taxpayers into Lockheed Martin and Raytheon to fuel a war that has sacrificed hundreds of thousands of people, if he thinks that's a good thing, fine, make that argument. But just because a Russian says something that Trump also happens to be aligned with, it doesn't make it bad. I mean,
right.
this cooties-based journalism is really insulting, even for someone as debased as Jake Tapper.
It's a cooties d'etat against the truth.
Pretty good. Pretty good. All right. That's enough.
By the way, Aaron, we were talking about how it was a sad day that Bernie Sanders said it was a sad day. It's also a sad day here at Useful Idiots Monday morning, because we have over 2,000 people watching, and we have 841 likes. Have I taught you nothing? Have we taught you nothing? Let's get that up to 1,000. We have 2,688 people watching and not even 1,000 likes. And I know that 2/3 of you are not hate watching this. So if you like the fact that we watch these shows for you and we report back for you, we're going to need this to get to 1,000. And if it's not okay, good. We're at 1,000. Keep it going, guys. And, it hurts me more than it hurts you to have to chide you and do this. But All right. Thank you all for being responsible idiots. Okay. Next clip.
We're gonna skip a little ahead here. Let's go to Senator Jack Reed, a Democrat, who, like many Democrats, like all Democrats, I can't think of one exception, is not happy that Trump is talking about winding down the Ukraine proxy war and talking about making peace with Russia. And Jack Reed vented his frustrations to ABC News.
Back to Ukraine, quite a remarkable week. You heard President Trump's personal attacks on President Zelensky, who's been fighting for his country for 3 years. What is your reaction to what you've heard this week and the kind of rhetoric you've heard?
Well, essentially, this is President Trump surrendering to the Russians. No surprise. In Afghanistan, he sat down with the Taliban, excluded the government of Afghanistan.
Oh my God, I can't believe he sat down with the Taliban. You know, the people who are in who you need to go negotiate with. That's horrible.
Doha, through his emissaries, and they essentially said, listen, don't bother us for a year and we'll be out. And now he's trying the same thing, which is basically we're going to undercut the Ukrainians. Oh, and by the way, we're going to get their precious minerals at bargain rate prices as a threat to do even more.
You know, I try to avoid commenting on people's physical appearance, but I'll make an exception here. You know, very tight neck, Jack Reed, very, very, very constrained. Seems like he's got under a lot of stress. And maybe he did some breathing and tried, you know, expunging the warmongering from his body, he'd be a bit more relaxed. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I mean, it can't be good for the body to be carrying that much like just aggression and desire to like see people die. So just try breathing, Senator Reed, and try letting go of some of the warmongering.
Yeah. I mean, Aaron, you're not really commenting on his looks. You're making a physical fitness, a health argument.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not like you're saying that man's neck has a built-in butt. Baron Saturday is saying that. So
Baron Saturday in the comments. Yeah, no, we don't say stuff like that here on You Still It's Monday Morning. Very serious show. Okay.
And by the way, if doing what if pulling out of Afghanistan was so bad, which by the way, I don't think so. But yeah, he's right. Trump wanted to do that, but who did do that? It was Biden. So is he criticizing Biden as well?
Worse. This is not a statesman or a diplomat. This is just someone who admires Putin, does not believe in the struggle of the Ukrainians, and is committed to cozying up to an autocrat. And that, I think, is going to be wrong, because Putin will not stop in Ukraine. He will begin in a campaign, both clandestine and, in many cases, overt, to undermine the other governments in Eastern Europe, and it'll create chaos again.
You know, clandestine and overt, that sounds like what the U.S. did in Ukraine when they backed a coup in 2014 and then covertly built up like 10 CIA bases on Russia's border in the years since, causing chaos. It sounds like a case of projection. It's like
projection.
Yeah, I mean, look, we don't even know yet the extent to which the U.S. was involved in the 2014 coup because it's secret. But what's out in the open is a lot. You know, U.S.-funded media outlets were cheering on the coup. Victoria Nuland, Chris Murphy, John McCain were there providing support to the protests that culminated in the violent overthrow of President Yanukovych. And then afterwards, you know, as I reported on, John Brennan, the director of the CIA, flew to Kyiv and told the new government, you should launch a new assault on the Donbass. And that led to the war. Literally right after John Brennan visited Kyiv in April 2014, a few days later, Kyiv launched this operation against the Donbass, setting off the war, which Russia then intervened in by arming the rebels and then directly intervening. So a lot of this is just projection. And it'd be great if we had journalists who would challenge these people on these facts, but even if they're aware of them, they would never ask them about them. But it's just the fact that the problem the proxy war is now is the president of the U.S. and his administration, they're willing to break from the narrative. So it's going to get increasingly awkward for them.
And, you know, we mentioned and Wickoff mentioned the Istanbul deal. And, you know, again, it's really tragic that they're going to go back to that deal. I mean, it's good. The tragedy is that they didn't stick to it in the first place, and all these people died for not just for nothing, but all these people died, and Ukraine will have less territory. But it's an important reminder that who sabotaged that deal? It was Boris Johnson on behalf of the West, and as we pointed out before, but important to keep in mind, Boris Johnson now openly refers to what's happening in Russia and Ukraine as a proxy war.
That's right. Well, it's like a proxy war, and we're not giving our proxies enough weapons. That's Boris Johnson. And then of course Jack Reed says that if we make peace with Russia and Ukraine, he's going to turn around and go invade somewhere else. Does anyone believe that? Seriously? Russia, after 3 years of war, literally to this day, has taken about 20% of Ukrainian territory, lost, according to U.S. intelligence, hundreds of thousands of soldiers. They're going to turn around and just invade somebody else now after they couldn't even capture more than 20% of their neighbor. It's so silly. It's so silly. And by the way, those other countries are in NATO, and the whole point of Russia invading Ukraine was to prevent it from joining NATO, because it doesn't want to be in a war actually directly with NATO. So it makes no sense. The whole thing is silly, and they're desperate. And that's a good sign, I think.
And by the way, just going back to poor Jack Reed's neck issues, look what he has looked like in the past. Let's take a look at this. This was in 2011. And look at the difference it makes to cure on a proxy war. Has a real impact on the neck.
Nice suit, though. Nice suit. I like his suit. Yeah.
But look at that. He developed the neckus buttus afterwards.
All right. Well, that's Jack Reed. Let's hear now from Senator Chris Van Hollen. Says some decent things relatively to, the rest of the Congress when it comes to Palestine. He's been critical of Israel, even as, of course, he's voted sometimes to arm Israel, which never makes any sense, as he's talking about like a genocide while still voting to arm the government doing it. But anyway, decent things. Still says decent things sometimes on Palestine.
Yeah.
But
and here he is talking about Trump's diplomacy on the issue of Ukraine, Russia.
This is not America first. This is America in retreat. And China and Russia and our adversaries are celebrating every moment of this, as our allies are scared to death. And this is not just rhetoric. This is reality.
This is what you heard at Munich last week.
Yeah, well, and I think, European allies and others from around the world who believe in freedom and democracy, they're wondering whether this is just rhetoric or whether this is a real shift. My warning to them is I think this is reality. I think Trump is much closer ideologically to Putin and other autocrats around the world than he is to democratic countries.
This is real, everyone. This is reality. You're not dreaming. We're actually going to have peace in Ukraine.
Right.
Wake up. Wake up. This is reality. Yes, this is really happening. Be alarmed. This is not this is not a dream. This is happening.
Right.
We have to face this. I mean, again, it goes back to like Bernie Sanders being sad about the U.S. talking to Russia. Like, why is this so alarming? The prospect of people not dying anymore with U.S. funding. It's very strange. It's very strange.
Also, they love to frame things as what our adversaries will see it as. What about Taiwan, or this is going to make China happy? And a couple things. One is that this actually brought Russia and China together. The United States position on this proxy war. And I don't know why China is going to be so happy with the fact that I think one of the things that Trump wants to do now is refocus on China. So I don't think they'll be happy about that. But again, can't we just talk about things on their own terms and not about how the bad guys in China are going to see this? A girl can dream.
They really need to expunge the adversary obsession also from their brains. Because again, either this is about Ukraine or it isn't. So all of a sudden it's like, if we don't stop Russia, Ukraine, the free world is over. But then it's like, what kind of a message does this send to China? So we're going to fight a war for messaging, for PR purposes. Is there a direct link between Ukraine's future and China and Taiwan? I mean, it makes no sense.
Well, he's admitting, person 17,000 to admit clandestinely or overtly that this is a proxy war. right? This is about how we're what the effect will be on Russia and China.
All right. Let's hear from one more outraged Democrat, outraged about peace. Congressmember Jim Himes, the ranking Democrat on the House Intelligence Committee.
Oh, yeah, this is a good clip.
Who is the ranking member? Let's start there with what the president was talking about. We discussed this with the panel a couple of minutes ago. Should the U.S. have some kind of guarantee or return on the billions of taxpayer dollars that have flowed into that conflict?
Well, Shannon, I have two problems with that concept. One, it just looks like an episode of The Sopranos, right? Give us your minerals or we're not going to help you fight a bloody butcher. I mean, is this really what we want the greatest country in history to be known for like, some mafia thing? Look.
I mean, again, putting aside who's the greatest country in history, it's always weird to me how U.S. politicians always feel the need to say how they're so great. Like, if you were to just have that attribute as a person, as an individual, and you were like, I'm the greatest person in history. I'm the greatest. I'm you would think that person has some serious issues. So why politicians feel the need to adopt that for their country? It's always strange to me. But anyway, putting that aside, it's actually worse than what he's saying, because Trump is not saying to Ukraine, hey, give us your minerals and we'll give you support to fight Russia. He's just saying, give us your minerals. That's all he's saying. That's all they're saying. Trump wants to be paid back for all the money that Biden spent on the proxy war. So Trump's not even offering Ukraine anything, I'm sorry to say. It's just a total shakedown. And I don't know if Trump really cares about what Zelensky says. I suspect maybe there's this thinking that if Zelensky says no, then that will just give Trump more cover to walk away from Ukraine. I don't think, because Trump has also said that he's not even sure if the minerals are as valuable as Ukraine says they are, which is true. It costs a lot of money to develop these minerals, and it might not be just efficient to gather them. And Russia also controls a lot of the territory where some of these minerals are based. So I wonder if Trump has just issued a demand that he knows will fail anyway. But regardless, he's not even offering Ukraine military support if Ukraine agrees. He's just saying, give it to us as payback.
Right. These people really need to do their homework. They need to watch our show.
We stood with the good guys. We stood with Churchill against Hitler in World War I. We stood.
Here we go. We got more good guy talk. We got more good guy talk from Jim
Also,
Himes.
wait, did he just say we stood with Churchill against Hitler in World War I? Not to punch down. That was World War II. I mean, not that I don't really respect his grasp of history, but we should be able to maybe distinguish between those two wars. Yeah.
Well, let's hear it again.
Known for like, some mafia thing. Look, we've always stood with the good guys. We stood with Churchill against Hitler in World War I. We stood with the good guys.
And I mean, again, sorry to be a snitch, but yeah, no, it was not World War I. That's a good catch, Katie.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Unless he's saying we stood with Churchill, we stood with the good guys in World War I, but I don't think so. But either way, I would say literally the only time that the U.S. has been on the right side of history in terms of wars has been World War II, and every other time it's been on the wrong side.
Yeah, but even there, I mean, I'm sorry to be like a little snitch, but like the U.S. was late to the game.
Of course, yeah.
At first, they were like Hitler, Jan, like okay, like sure, whatever, and then eventually after Pearl Harbor, they got in. But
yes,
that's another matter. Okay.
Yeah. Even when we've gotten it wrong in Vietnam, we were standing with the good guys against the Viet Cong. In Iraq, we were.
Okay, typical major liberal talking point. Vietnam was not bad. It was just we got it wrong. We just made a mistake, but we were with the good guys. No, not
even when we're dropping napalm and tearing off the skin of Vietnamese villagers and killing millions of people. We were against the bad guys, which is again, and Viet Cong is a derogatory term for North Vietnamese, which is people fighting against the U.S. attempt to destroy their country. And I mean, so anyway, he's just being a complete war hawk there. And yes, Saddam Hussein was a bad guy, but he's forgetting that the U.S. supported Saddam Hussein when he was carrying out his worst atrocities.
Right.
So, anyway.
Yeah, and also, does anyone think that Iraq is better off because of that?
Yeah, and the broader Middle East. I mean,
right.
Again,
True,
great job. Yeah. Great job standing with the good guys.
going after Saddam Hussein. Now this president is standing with the bad guy. He's saying Zelensky is the problem, when Zelensky, with very few resources, is trying to stand up for democracy against a totalitarian butcher.
Yeah,
Butcher,
okay.
he loves that term.
We've talked about this before, but even a year before Russia invaded, so like before Zelensky had the excuse of martial law, he shut down opposition political parties and television networks. And the Biden administration cheered that on. One Zelensky aide called this a welcome gift to Biden to shut down the opposition. So is that a democracy, Jim Himes? Is that what you really want? Yes, it is actually. He wants Zelensky to be a U.S. puppet. And that's why he's praising him, is because not because he cares about democracy, but because Zelensky has followed U.S. orders. And so, but really, I think my takeaway from all this is that Jim Himes and Jake Tapper should start a new show called Good Guys and Bad Guys, where they just sit around and just talk about the guys who have cooties and don't have cooties and why we should side with those who don't have cooties. I think that's the name of a new show that could actually maybe bring some ratings to CNN, because that could be entertaining.
What, cooties or cooties or not cooties?
Good guys, bad guys, cooties, non-cooties, whatever.
Right.
You know, something along those lines.
Cooties to ta.
Yeah, the cooties to ta. That's the level of thinking right now inside the pro-proxy war uniparty inside Washington. Yeah. Okay.
And by the way, I just want to point something out. It would be great if Jim Himes knew about this, but according to the great Matthew Ho, the anti-war veteran, he had a piece in Counterpunch that laid out how nearly 3/4 of the world's dictators receive U.S. weapons and military assistance from the U.S.
Yeah, including General Sisi in Egypt, an autocrat that none of these people ever seem to care about when complaining about autocrats and the U.S. siding with dictators. As a talking point only used when we're talking about a country that's outside of the control of U.S. hegemony.
Exactly, and as Matthew says in this piece, he says, "Please remember this the next time someone tells you the U.S. should do X or Y because such and such a nation is bad." So bring that up, guys, when people say that.
All right, let's go back to Stephen Witkoff, who, in between negotiating peace with Russia, his job is supposed to be being Trump's envoy to the Middle East and brokering a ceasefire there. And here he is, in light of Trump recently calling for ethnic cleansing in Gaza. Here he is talking about Trump's plans for Gaza and what is going to come next in Israel-Palestine.
In that second phase, talking about what comes next for Gaza becomes part of that. For that day after, do Hamas leaders need to leave Gaza? Are you discussing that? And if so, where would they go?
So, Margaret, the May 27th protocol agreement signed last May 27th sets forth that the Phase 2 negotiation is much about two things. A permanent ceasefire, a cessation of all violence, and in addition to that, the fact that Hamas cannot be allowed to come back into the government. And I think the way you square that circle is that Hamas has to go. They've got to leave. And we're going to, the negotiation will be around that. I would say physically, that's correct.
Where would they go? Has any country offered to take them in?
Well, I think the devil is in the details, and we've had a lot of discussions around it. I'm not at liberty to have that discussion, that specific discussion today, but we've got some ideas, and that will be part of the negotiation.
Well, as Antony Blinken admitted in his last days in office, Hamas has grown in size. They've recruited more recruits because Israel was waging mass murder in Gaza. So I think this notion that Hamas has to go, I think that's going to be pretty difficult to pull off. And again, notice how no one ever says that Netanyahu has to go, even though he just killed so many people in Gaza and left it in ruins. But that, of course, that standard's never applied to him. But I think this demand that Hamas has to go will be challenging. I don't think Hamas really, for my limited understanding, I don't know if Hamas really cares about being the ruler of Gaza anymore, because prior to October 7th, my sense is they were tired of just being like the administrator of a death camp, pretty much on Israel's behalf. And they see themselves as a resistance organization. And so ruling over Gaza, maybe that will be something they don't want to take up. And maybe that's the answer there. But in terms of physically leaving Gaza, I'm skeptical that that can be pulled off.
Yeah, and also like the phase 2 of the agreement says Hamas cannot be allowed into government. That's what he says. That's false. Broadly, phase 2 is for more hostage exchange and for Israeli forces to withdraw from Gaza. But that's obviously, why should he be limited by reality and facts? Yeah.
All right. Well, more from Steve Witkoff.
It is saying that when you went to Gaza and you personally saw the devastation there, you couldn't understand why anyone would stay, but it doesn't mean you can't have some sort of right to return if that's the policy that works for people. Does the Trump administration support Palestinians' right to return?
Well, Margaret, first of all, what I would say is this. President Trump is one of the most sensible human beings you're ever going to meet. He is... He understands that it makes no sense to endorse old policy prescriptions that have not worked. And what has not worked in Gaza are all of these old policy prescriptions. So he's come up with a new notion. And the new notion is
ethnic cleansing. The new notion is ethnic cleansing. That is the new notion, because these old policies haven't worked. I mean, this is really cynical. So Israel and the U.S. stand apart from the rest of the world in blocking any effort toward Palestinian self-determination, which is their right. And of course, Palestinian right to return. And then they block it. They put Gaza under siege. They launch periodic massacres. Hamas launches October 7th. Then they destroy Gaza. And then they declare, yeah, see, the old formula hasn't worked. Nothing works. So we're going to try out something new, which is the U.S. is going to own Gaza. Palestinians will be kicked out and they can't come back. That's their fresh way of thinking. Rather than accepting the deal that's been put to them for decades now from all the Arab states and Iran, offering Israel normalization if it allowed for a Palestinian state in the West Bank and Gaza, which is a big compromise for Palestinians. It's actually a surrender because Palestinians would be taking just 22% of their homeland. But Israel is such a colonizer that it won't even accept a Palestinian compromise, a Palestinian surrender, basically.
Right.
And so now the answer is outright ethnic cleansing.
Yep. And also, I mean, it's so fascinating because they never call out Israel for violating the ceasefire. It's always Hamas that's breaking it, even though historically that's 100%. Well, not historically, that is not true. And Netanyahu has withheld the release of the final 602 Palestinian hostages. And you know why? Because he's really upset. Well, he doesn't want to release them anyway, but I think he's really upset by that hostage release ceremony because I don't know if people saw this, but one of the hostages kissed a Hamas member's head when he was being released, and people are absolutely freaking out about that.
let's create a better opportunity for people who have lived in Gaza to have a better life for themselves, better upside, better
who have lived in Gaza. Interesting way of putting it.
Aspirations for what can happen for their children and so forth. The May 27th protocol talked about Gaza as if it was a 5-year reconstruction plan. We've been talking in the Trump administration about a 15-year horizon, perhaps even 20 years. And now all of a sudden the Wall Street Journal printed an article yesterday agreeing with that math. There is a much level setting the facts suggests that nobody can really live there in a safe environment for probably at least 15 years. So
I do think there's some truth to that, certainly in some areas. But a part of the problem here is this is a human decision, and that Israel blocks everything going into Gaza and has forever, even before October 7th. Israel had such control over Gaza that it could calculate how many calories everyone would need without a full-blown starvation crisis, and blocked everything, including baby formula. And reconstruction material. So if Israel wouldn't block reconstruction material, it's possible Gaza could rebuild a lot quicker than in 15 years. But at the same time, it is true that Gaza has been left in ruins because Israel destroyed it. And the answer there is, okay, if you're not going to let Palestinians return to their homes inside what is now Israel, because so many people in Gaza are refugees from Israel, from what is now Israel, or are the descendants of refugees and have homes that were stolen from them. If you're not going to let them go back to their stolen homes, then why can't they go to the occupied West Bank, which is internationally recognized Palestinian land, and kick out the Jewish settlers who have no right to be there?
Exactly. That's what they should be doing, but they'll never do that.
Effectively, people have been under this misassumption. When you're under a misassumption about facts, you're not going to make decisions correctly. We're making decisions based on a real set of facts. And so there's a lot of...
And the real set of facts is you accept Israel's right to occupy and displace Palestinians. That's the baseline that they now want to make the norm for the world, that Israel has the right to occupy Palestinians indefinitely, deny them the right to self-determination, steal their homes, put them under murderous blockades. That's the baseline set of facts that we all now have to accept. It's bleak. It's very, very bleak.
It is bleak, yeah. And again, this is a reminder that, it's very sad that some human lives are obviously worth more than others. And while it's good that they're trying to move towards settling the war in Ukraine, it is really atrocious that Palestinians are seen as so subhuman and that they're so disposable. And it's reflected by what people like Wickoff is saying, but also by our media. And I just feel like that has to be said. And sometimes I think we lose track of that because it's so built into our media coverage. But it's like a fish not realizing that it's wet and that it's in water. Yeah, it is bleak though, as you said. Yeah. Well, is that our last clip, or do we want to?
We can do one more. Let's
because we love you guys. Yeah.
Let's look at the mass layoffs as a result of Elon Musk's chainsaw for bureaucracy, and let's hear from Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent.
Sector will not be crowded out anymore. All the jobs created by the Biden, not all, but the 85% of the jobs created by the Biden administration were government jobs, government adjacent. They crowded out the private sector. The government interest rates spiked. I would just point out, interest rates are down 5 weeks in a row on the 10-year since President Trump took office. And mortgage rates are down. We're going to get that down. I was sitting next to, I noticed you're going to have Governor Youngkin later. I was sitting next to him on Friday, and I said, Governor, how do you feel about these layoffs in Northern Virginia? And he said, Scott, I think he told me there's something like 350,000 private sector job openings in Virginia. State of Virginia has a portal, so there are plenty of private sector jobs, and those are good paying, and we're going to re-privatize this economy like President Trump promised.
Great.
We're going to re-privatize the economy. Did Trump promise that?
No, he never did, by the way.
I'm going to privatize the economy. Yes.
No, he did not.
Yeah.
Great. Just lying through their teeth. Yeah.
So they're bragging about cutting jobs that Biden created, which were in the federal workforce. Programs like this were once very popular. Like after the Great Depression, it was seen as a good thing in times of economic turmoil for the government, rather than redirecting money towards the ultra wealthy, spending it on giving people jobs, like if it serves the public good. But Trump apparently ran on doing that. It's the first I've heard that Trump promised to re-privatize the economy, is if it isn't already privatized enough. And meanwhile, teachers barely make enough to live, and in some cases, like don't make enough to live, but yet there's no concern for them, no talk about raising their salaries. It's all just about the private sector will take care of everything.
Right. Also, a lot of these privatized government jobs are just getting private contractors to do the same work for more money. So it's a greater cost to the taxpayer for the same result.
There we go.
And increases government expenditure, right? which they claim to care about. But it's never about that, yeah.
Well, when you hand over the government to one of the most, like one of the wealthiest people in the world, if not the wealthiest, who loves to brandish a fake chainsaw, things like this are going to happen. And apparently, this is what Trump promised. So this is what we're getting.
Yeah. And, all of this stuff is, lest anyone think that this is really about the debt. All of these things that they're proposing are, first of all, the deficit doesn't matter. And we can get into that on another episode. But this is a drop in the bucket. The budget deficit is $1.8 trillion. And the Republican tax bill will only increase that number by a lot because it will be cutting revenue that the government gets. And if they fired every federal worker tomorrow, it would only save $300 billion.
All right. Well, we've come to the end of the show. This has been a great episode. Our website is usefulidiots.podcast.com. Anything we want to do before we wrap? Do you want to read any chats, or you want to plug anything?
Yeah, let's see. Any good chats? Let's take a look. And thanks again so much for watching. And I will announce that tomorrow on the Katie Halper Show at youtube.com/the Katie Halper Show, we are having on Lawrence Wilkerson, Colonel Lawrence Wilkerson, Ben Cohen from Ben and Jerry's, and Helena Caban and Rami Khoury to talk about understanding Hamas and why it matters. So it's going to be a great show.
That sounds like a hearty scoop of great
leftist
content. Yes.
Nice. Yeah.
Yes.
And I'm gonna talk to Ben about Chubby Hubby. It's my favorite flavor.
Okay. All right.
Yeah.
All right. I'm going to be guest hosting the Jimmy Dore Show this evening. This is Monday. So I believe that's at 6 p.m. Eastern time. So tune in to that if you're around. And most importantly, go right now to the hottest website on the web, usefulidiots.podcast.com, to support the show and get bonus content. Thanks so much for keeping us going and for watching Monday morning. We'll see you next time.
Bye, everyone. Thanks so much.